Welcome to the Grow Strong Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Meredith Bell, and I interview business leaders who are committed to their own growth and the development of everyone on their team. If you enjoy my podcast, be sure to subscribe and rate it on your favorite podcast platform. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Grow Strong Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Meredith Bell, and I have a question for you to consider today as we move into this conversation. How would you evaluate your coachability? How coachable are you? Well, today I have with me two guests, two people who have just written a book on this very important topic, and I'd like to welcome Jacquelyn Lane and Scott Osman to my show. I'm so glad to have you here.
Thank you so much for having us. It's a real pleasure.
Yeah, great to be with you, Meredith.
I am really looking forward to this conversation, and I want to tell my listeners more about you before we jump into our conversation. Scott and Jacquelyn are the two lead authors of the new book, Becoming Coachable: Unleashing the Power of Executive Coaching to Transform Your Leadership and Life. Their co-author is Marshall Goldsmith, a name I'm sure is familiar to everyone who is listening to my show. Scott is the founder and CEO of the 100 Coaches Agency, and Jacquelyn is the president. Together, they've designed a proprietary curation process for matching leaders and executive coaches that results in an extraordinary experience for both the leader and the coach. Scott co-founded the 100 Coaches community with Marshall in 2016, and Jacquelyn is a critical pillar in that community of coaches. I love that they are committed not just to elevating the quality of leadership. They're also focused on guiding leaders to elevate everyone in their organization so that all have the opportunity to flourish. And that's a word we'll be talking more about in our conversation. First, I want to start with the title of your book, because to me, those two words are really important to who you are and the work that you're doing, becoming and coachable. Talk a little bit about how you came up with that title.
Yeah.
Jump in.
Okay, great. So one of the things we had always spoken about was writing a book on being coachable, but why the word becoming? And the idea of becoming is this idea that the process is never really complete, that we're constantly learning and growing and becoming better versions of ourselves. And the word coachable, of course, means the process of receiving coaching. And that coaching can be either from an official executive coach or just from the people around you in your life. But we realize that the people who get the most out of that feedback and continue to learn and grow and evolve the fastest and go the furthest are the people who know how to engage in that process well. In short, we call those people coachable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Meredith, when we first started thinking about the book, I think we probably entertained the idea of become coachable and
being
coachable, things like that.
How to be coachable.
But it's true, becoming coachable became the word because we do recognize it's an evolving process. I think it's also a little bit of a tip of the hat, if you will, to my own personal journey of becoming coachable and recognizing that there are little tipping points in our life when all of a sudden we open ourselves up to the principles of becoming coachable. In my case, it was being open to change. And then from there on out, it's just a process of continued growth. And that's why the title became Becoming Coachable.
Well, and I would love for you to talk more, each of you, about your journeys in becoming coachable yourselves, because I know you've got very separate but important stories that kind of fed into where you are today.
Well, I'll just continue because I opened it up a little bit. I didn't know anything about coaching, quite frankly. Most of my career, my first career, I was a fashion photographer. My second career, I was a brand strategist. And in both of those roles, I was always looked to as the person who had the answers. And I kind of like that. and, knowing that I had the answers, and I got a lot of great feedback because I had the answers, and people looked to me for that. And I thought, well, that's great, and that's leadership, and that's always been successful for me. And then met Marshall and became immersed in the world of executive coaching. Thought I needed a coach, or certainly would like a coach, and started talking to coaches. And the coaches said, well, what do you want to work on? And I don't know. My answer always was, I don't know. Things are pretty good. I don't know that I have anything I want to work on. And they would say, well, if you don't have anything to work on, I don't know what we would do together. And then Jacquelyn one day said to me, you don't always have to be right. And it had never occurred to me that that was even an option. And once I understood that I didn't have to be right all the time, I became open to change, open to new suggestions, open to letting other people take the lead. And I think in that moment, I became coachable. And then I found a coach, and my gosh, in the 18 months since that happened, so yes, it was only 18 months ago, there has been massive expansion in my life. The work of working with a coach and letting go of the need to be right has just been phenomenal.
Yeah. And I had a journey as well in the process of becoming coachable, where, I grew up in a family with a father who's a surgeon. And, when you have that, there's this, very low margin of error that's accepted in the world of surgery, as you might imagine. And, that's a good thing. And so my dad would always tell us things like, why not 100%? We'd come home and you get a 90% or a 95%, which is still an A, right? And he would say, well, why not 100%? In surgery, that could be someone's life. And, so there was this very much this idea of anything short of perfection is not great. We really need to strive for perfection in everything always. And so, of course, that takes a very, serious turn in my schooling and upbringing. And, very hard to not always have that perfection. And so feedback to me when I started my work in corporate America felt very punitive, or like a assault on me in some form or fashion. It would be hard to take that feedback. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of the younger generation does really struggle with that for some of the same reasons. And, it wasn't until I had a really wonderful supervisor who helped me see that that feedback was really a gift, and that shortcomings were an opportunity for growth, and life and career wouldn't have near as much fulfillment or meaning if there wasn't room for that growth. And the process of becoming the leader that I wanted to be was going to require constantly engaging with that feedback process, falling short, doing better. And so that's when I started to make a shift in my own mind and become more coachable.
We're both working on.
We're still becoming,
Yeah,
as we say.
Well, I love both of your stories because it illustrates to me a really important thing that we all need to be aware of when we think about becoming coachable. And that is recognizing the stories we've accepted and believed about ourselves that we bring with us into the workplace from our past, that we're not even aware of, that can become the things that are our stumbling blocks. And that's one reason why having a coach can just be so valuable to help us become more aware. So I love the ING part of becoming, because it does show we're never arriving. This is a whole journey throughout our lives to keep expanding. As you were saying, Scott, this expansion that you've experienced, and that can continue happening as we continue being willing to grow. I also love the structure of your book, where the first part is getting at the fact that people who may not be as familiar with coaching, what is it it could do for them? That second part, I would love to delve into a little bit because of the 4 areas that really make up this becoming coachable aspect. And so if you could talk just a little bit about each of those, and then we'll also look at that third part that to me is all about, getting beyond yourself and to others to really helping them flourish. But let's zero in on that middle part for a minute. Talk about those 4 elements that you have identified as being so critical.
Sure. Well, I'll take the first one since that was, I guess, my element now. The first, we call it our openness framework. It's the 4 qualities that it takes to become coachable. And the first quality is being open to change. In hindsight, I think it almost seems self-evident. If you're unwilling to change, then a coach really can't help you. But so many people think that they'll just bring a coach in, the coach will make you change, or the coach will do something for you. But the reality is, and this is really the reality of the book, Becoming Coachable, is the most important person in the coaching relationship is the person being coached, right? We all understand that the best coach in the world can't force their coachee to do anything. And so it takes someone with a willingness to be open to change to enter into the coaching relationship to get the benefit of the experience of the coach and to make the change that really, again, unleashes that expansion that we talk about.
Yeah. And as it would feel so fitting now, open to feedback is the second one. And that, of course, was a lot of my challenge, was accepting that feedback and really seeing it as the gift that it is. Because feedback is necessary for us to understand how it is we're perceived, how we interact with the world. There are all kinds of ways that we may be showing up that we are unaware of. We call those blind spots. And a coach can certainly help you become more aware of those. But to really be a leader with any longevity and any long-term impact, you really do have to learn how to engage in that process of feedback. None of us can see ourselves. It's real self-awareness takes the reflections of other people in order to understand how it is that we interact with the world. So again, learning to be open to that process. It's not saying you have to be great at feedback, but we think being open to that process, being willing to come in with some humility, to say thank you every time we receive feedback is a really important part of then becoming coachable.
Yeah, I love that. Everybody talks about how hard it is to receive feedback through a 360. A 360 is often described as one of those most painful experiences in life. But I think there's a whole other way of looking at it. And that is to say that 360 is probably one of the greatest gifts you're ever going to get, right? It's this one moment in time where an accumulated group of people led by your coach are going to tell you all the things you need to do to be better, to improve, the areas that you're weak. And instead of seeing them as faults, you can see them as possibilities. So I love the second quality, the openness framework. The third quality, also kind of sort of self-evident and yet so often isn't, is being open to taking action. Because you can be open to change and then hear all that great feedback. But if you're unwilling to take the action to make that change a reality, then coaching is not going to be successful for you. You're not going to get to that amazing place that you can get to as a leader if you don't take the action from the feedback and the willingness to change. So that was 3. But then number 4, I think, number 4 is probably, I think, in many ways, the most important of all.
Yeah, I think it's the hardest of all, too. It's a word that I think makes all of us squirm a little bit. It's open to accountability, and that is the process of then continuing to receive input on how it is that we are making those changes that we committed to making. So, you might set aside from your feedback, you might learn that you shout too much, right? Your team is intimidated by you. You're a little too loud, yell too much, too angry, let's say, in meetings. And so they've given you that feedback and you make the decision. The action I'm going to take is I'm going to yell less in meetings, right? But accountability is all about finding out how well you are doing at taking that action and making that change. And it can be a little uncomfortable because we're being confronted with the goals and the outcomes of the things that we set out to do ourselves. But I think that's part of what makes it lasting change, because without accountability, it's so easy for all of us to backslide into the same habits that we started out with.
Yeah, Marshall had a great insight recently. You mentioned lasting change. We go through the coaching process and, very often you'll be with a coach for a year, maybe 18 months. And then it feels like the process is over and you've made the change and you can move on. It turns out that without constant accountability, a lifetime of accountability, those changes aren't as permanent as we thought.
Right.
And so some notion of accountability, even if you cease the coaching relationship, find someone else who can be an accountability partner so that you can continue to hold on to those great successes that you've had.
Right. Yeah.
You know, hearing you both describe that, I was taken back to Marshall's first book that I read, and that's when I fell in love with him and his work. What got you here won't get you there. Because the whole second half of that book is all about what you're talking about. You know, this being willing to ask for feedback initially, but also on an ongoing basis. And I'll never forget, he said, you know, you have to think of this like marketing, where in marketing, you have to repeat your message multiple times. And when you have asked people for feedback and you've said, okay, I'm going to work on this, going back and asking them for how am I doing reminds them that, yes, you've made this commitment, you're working on it. So they become more aware, they pay more attention to whether you're doing it or not, because everybody's so busy with their own work and priorities that, and I think all of this goes back to recruiting others to support you in your commitment to change. And as I was listening to you describe these 4 elements, I was struck with this idea that it's so hard sometimes for leaders to make themselves vulnerable, because 4 of these require vulnerability and a willingness to say, I'm not perfect, to the other people around you. Even this accountability piece of, you know, I haven't arrived yet, I'm still working on this. How do you respond to leaders or in coaching situations where the leaders are just hesitant to be open to others about any of these 4 elements?
Yeah, I totally relate to that. You know, there's such an expectation for leaders, and I'll just say from my own experience in corporate America, to have it all together. And yet, when all of us look at some of the leaders that we admire the most, I think we will all see leaders that have humility and vulnerability rise to the very top of our lists. I mean, there is nothing about great leadership or a big mission that doesn't require courage and vulnerability. But there's no denying that it's really hard. So I guess my advice to people would be just try it a little bit, maybe in a small setting with a smaller portion of your team, or even just one trusted friend at work. Try that process of becoming vulnerable, choosing humility, admitting fault, and asking for support to do better, and just see how they respond. My guess is that they'll respond really positively, as most of us do when we've experienced that. And then hopefully that will start to get that flywheel turning. You know, we gain a little bit more courage to try it in a slightly bigger setting. And then I think it can build from there.
Yeah, I think, Meredith, leadership is an unnatural act. You know, you work your whole life, you know, you go to school, you want to get A's, you want to get gold stars, you want to win trophies. You get into college, whatever your journey is, all of your journey is about accomplishment and demonstrating that you are, if not the best in the world, certainly the best you can be. And those are, you know, media hypes those people, and that's our role models in many respects. And then one day you get put in a position of leadership. And great leaders understand, usually with a coach, that leadership is never about you. Leadership is always about how you help everybody around you be successful. Even if you were the best CMO, chief marketing officer in the world, when you become the CEO, then the CMO who replaces you has to do their job. And you can't tell them what to do. You have to elevate them so that they can do their best. And it occurs to me, as you're talking about this question of vulnerability, that has got to be one of the greatest strengths of being a great CEO, is demonstrating that you're fallible, demonstrating that you're imperfect, so that your entire team can also share their imperfections with you so that you can help them be better. And that's really the role of leader. But I'll tell you, even as I talk about it, it makes me a little nauseous because I know it's so unnatural, and yet it's what the great leaders all do.
Yeah, I'm reminded of Alan Mullally's story, right? So Alan Mulally became the CEO at Ford Motor Company when, the company was really struggling. And there was this attitude among the C-suite leaders that we're not going to talk about the problems of the company. Everything's good. But the people who were on the front lines and, working in the plants knew that there was a real problem. And the company was set to lose several $billion that year. I mean, it was
17 billion.
17 billion.
The plan.
Yeah, that was the
plan.
And so they knew it wasn't going to be a good year. And yet when Alan came in, everyone was saying, all green lights here, nothing to fear, nothing to worry about. And Alan just kept coming back week after week and asking people, please share what's going on. Is there any place that you're feeling, your organization is unsure, that you're struggling, whatever it may be? And he said the first time that someone came to the meeting and had either a yellow or a red light and said, hey, this isn't working, I need help. He said that he
stood up and
applauded them and thanked them for their vulnerability, for sharing what was really going on. And that, he said, began to really open up the floodgates. And suddenly all the other executives started to share more vulnerably and more honestly about what was really going on, but only when they actually had awareness of the problems and could discuss the problems, could they then start to address them.
Yeah.
And it turned the company around.
Yes, that is such a critical point. The person in charge, the top person, and it can be a leader of a team as well.
Mm-hmm.
When they are willing to not just ask the question, but respond in a way that makes it safe for people to be honest, then it, like you say, it opens the floodgates. It makes it safe for others because people are watching for reactions, and they're going to respond according to the reactions that they see in that leader. One of the things that you all are talking about made me think of one of my favorite quotes from your book. The book is fundamentally about the power of relationship to transform lives. I just love that, because going back to your point, Scott, about leadership not being natural, on the other hand, if we can tap into our ability to really learn how to flourish ourselves, then it makes it so much easier to be willing to help others flourish or to elevate them. And that, I know, is the third part of your book. So I would love for you to talk about how that part came to be and why it's such an important element in this whole discussion.
Yeah, that was magical.
Thank you.
I will say, it's true. I said, and it's true. I stand by it. Leadership is unnatural. There's a corollary to that, and that is once you overcome the unnatural feeling of leadership, and you enter into this space of elevating others and being vulnerable, leadership is probably one of the most glorious things you can experience. Because you have the ability as a leader to really demonstrably change the lives of people around you, and everything, as Sally Helgeson's new book, Rising Together, everything rises together, and there's just no better feeling than that. So, but the third part of our book, so we'd written the first two parts of the book, which at the time we thought we were calling it the book. And then we kind of sat back and we were reviewing it, and we realized there was just something missing. And the little phrase that we came up with, which I think became the title of the third part, is "To what end?" Because really, it's great to understand the world of coaching, and it's great to understand what you need to do to become coachable and what all that means. But then why are we doing that? Like, why do we care, and why should you care? And the answer was because we believe that in becoming coachable, yes, you're a better leader and you help your company, your employees be more successful. In becoming a better leader, you also become a better human being, because those two things really go hand in hand. So it's going to impact your family. But really, all of it adds up to going a little bit further and thinking it's about human flourishing. I think Jacquelyn and I, and really the whole 100 Coaches organization, fundamentally believe that the world is going to change for the better through better leadership.
Right.
I mean, that's why we're in the world of coaching, because we recognize that the real the real leverage, the real fulcrum of change is the leader. We just see it time and again. A great leader comes into an organization, the organization elevates and flourishes and expands, and a bad leader goes into an organization and it falls apart and diminishes. And we just want more better leaders wherever we can help them be created.
Yeah. And we realize too that leadership is really, in essence, about relationships. And in fact, business is about relationships. Anything that takes the power of the collective is really about relationships. And it's a John Maxwell saying that says a leader without followers is just a guy taking a walk, right? So it just shows the importance of being in relationship. And that's exactly what we're talking about. Yes, coaching is one of those relationships that can really change your life. But all of the relationships in our lives, we never know which one is one that's going to change someone's life forever. And, part of the goal, the job of the leader is, again, to be in relationship with all those people. First and foremost, to be in relationship with themselves, understand who they are, relationship with their team, their clients, customers, suppliers, the board, all of these different stakeholders. You never really know when someone is open to that moment of change or when they're at a tipping point in their life. But it really is this beautiful idea of a ripple effect. Leadership's not about me and me getting to the top. Right. Leadership is about all of us.
So the third part of the book was us leaning into that thought. And it's really fun because the way we sort of opened it up to ourselves is we had a conversation. And that conversation was literally, we recorded the conversation to what end as we were exploring, like, why are we doing this? And that conversation ended up becoming the last chapter of the book, which is a conversation between me and Jacquelyn and Marshall.
Yeah, it was a wonderful conversation, and there were so many interesting and valuable stories contained within that. I'd love for you to share what, from your perspective, would you say is the definition of flourishing? What does that mean? And then what does it look like in action?
Do you want to give it a go?
Sure. I think fundamentally we should really have a real definition for this. But I think fundamentally flourishing is everybody being their fullest self. It's each person that you're interacting with, each person that you affect, helping them be themselves in their fullness, whatever that is. I think we fundamentally believe that if not everybody, almost everybody is born sort of perfect in their own way, right? And then the world kind of affects us and pushes us around. But if we're lucky, we get surrounded by other people who see us in our fullness and see us with the potential that we have and help us reach that potential. And I think that in a flourishing environment with a leader who embraces flourishing, each of the people in their world, employees, the families of the employees, their own families, really starts to be their fullest self. And that creates this amazing expansion where things just work together with a fluidity and a seamlessness that's unparalleled.
Yeah. My definition would be kind of similar, but a little, maybe I'll hit on something slightly different, is I think flourishing is a generative force that allows us all to rise together. It's just something that it's like 1 + 1 = 3. Flourishing math is not normal math. It's non-zero sum. More is created, more is available for all of us. And I think that goes back to your point, Scott, of we are all being elevated into our fullest expressions of self.
Yeah, it's years ago, I used to think that trust was one of the most important things, right? That I just observed in businesses that had trust, there was less friction in the system. You can just do so much more quickly. And I think flourishing is really, sort of 10x trust. It's something even more than just trusting each other. It's just knowing that we're all part of the same system, and that we're all making our own contribution. And again, going back to leadership, and the leader is helping everybody's contribution, be maximized. In those cases, in the world of flourishing, scarcity is kind of it's a strange word with a lot of overtones to it. But I think the reality is when we create more, there's more for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the flourishing world that we keep thinking about.
Yes, I was thinking of the word abundance as you were both.
Yeah.
Contrast to scarcity is there's plenty for all. And, as I think about what is required for a leader to flourish themselves and also help others flourish, it is that belief in what's possible for everyone and not feeling that if they give praise to others or even challenge others to perform at a higher level because of what they see as their capabilities, that it doesn't diminish the leader. I think somehow there is often this perspective of a zero-sum game. So if I give to you or if I acknowledge you, then somehow that takes away from me.
Right.
This requires all those four elements that you were talking about, this willingness to change what I believe about what's true with other people and taking that step to try. What does it feel like? What does it look like if I'm willing to be generous with others in what I see in them? And one of the things I also wanted to check with you on was this distinction you make between rising and flourishing, because I think that might be useful in this whole discussion of what does it look like?
Yeah, I think if I may give a visual example, I think rising is this idea of I want my light to shine as brightly as it can. And I think the difference is that flourishing says, I can shine my light bright, but I can use that same light and that candle can ignite thousands of other candles and my own light will not be diminished.
Mm.
Yeah, we're in, Meredith, we're in this unbelievably privileged position of working with the best coaches and leadership thinkers in the world. And also we get to see the effect of their coaching and how the leaders that they're working with are just, they're just doing so well. They have such great success at the highest levels, highest level of government, highest level of company. And I think what we see commonly throughout them is exactly what Jacquelyn was saying, is what happens is the leader, their light, sure, burns a little bit brighter, but the entire light, continuing the analogy, of the organization gets so much brighter. Yeah, so Meredith, I agree with you about the team. The idea that as an individual, we can be pretty great as an individual, but we'll never be as great as an individual as we can be together. And that's the amazing thing about being a leader. As a leader, you get this opportunity to go way beyond your own individual potential and really have the potential of the collective. It's such a privileged position to be in. But in order to get there, going back to sort of that thing that you have to overcome this idea that it's all about you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the essence, I think, of leadership.
Mm-hmm. The other thing that I think it's part of growing and maturing as an individual and also as a leader, this recognition that I don't need to get my ego wrapped up in what happens. So I don't take it personally, whether it's receiving feedback, whether it's being held accountable, any of those elements, but also just in terms of being willing to recognize the contributions of others and raise that awareness of how important it is to the flourishing of others to acknowledge their contributions, the way they have contributed to the greater good or what we're all doing. Because this whole question, I love it, to what end? It's the same question employees are asking, to what end? Why am I doing this work? And so how a leader can acknowledge them, to me, would light that flame, would cause them to, burn brighter and be more willing to contribute. I'd love for you to share an example or two. You were talking about the impact that you've been able to witness in the difference coaching makes for leaders. If you have any like before, during, after examples of someone, what was it they were struggling with? What insights did they get from the coaching? And then what difference did that make in who they were becoming in their role?
Sure. Well, I think our favorite example in the book is Hubert Joly, who he really speaks eloquently of who he was before and how he made the change and who he was after. So he talks about before he was a McKinsey consultant and he was, again, always smartest guy in the room. That was his job. And he felt that being a leader meant being the smartest person in the room and telling everybody what they needed to know. That was leadership. And I suspect decades ago that probably was leadership. It's certainly not leadership today. And he got Marshall as a coach. And he became the CEO of Best Buy at a very, very tumultuous time in that particular marketplace. I think he says when he became the CEO of Best Buy, there was not a single analyst who had a buy recommendation on the stock, that everybody expected that company was going to fail. And, and a lot of people were recommending, cut the headcount, get rid of employees. Like that's the quickest way to save expenses. And with the help of his coach, and he openly recognizes, as many do, that the coach is the person who helped him make this transition, that he decided that they were going to put the employees first. And instead of talking about head count, they talk about heart count. And how do they hold on to the hearts of all of the employees and help change the whole destiny of the company? And they did. And without massive layoffs, they turned the company around. They figured out a new place in the market that was much more heart-led. Hubert's got this wonderful book, The Heart of Business, that he wrote. He now teaches at Harvard, and really made this amazing change. And part of it was he stood up in front of everybody and he said, "My name's Hubert Joly, and I need help." And recognizing if the leader can ask for help and the leader can be vulnerable, then everybody else in the organization can do the same thing. And then everybody in the organization can grow and be better.
Right. So true. I think another great example, if people wanted to read further, would be in Chef David Chang's book, Eat a Peach. And he tells the story about being coached by Marshall and having also Dr. Jim Kim as a mentor, and the power of that, because he had this, crippling depression and self-doubt. Meanwhile, the world of high-end cuisine is very competitive and cutthroat. And, culturally, I think many people would tell you those kitchens are not necessarily a great place to work as far as, you're not going to be told kind things all the time. There are harsh words exchanged in the heat of, the dinner rush. And, he had Marshall as a coach and really had this beautiful realization about himself and seeing that, he was holding himself, he was holding the company back. And it was this, Marshall really encouraged him on how to be humble and how to take, essentially go through this entire process we've been talking about and becoming coachable, becoming open to that change and feedback, taking action, being held accountable. And it was a tough process for him. And yet, you see the results in his own personal life and the company. They've gone so much further as a result of him, learning how to let go and learning to choose humility. And I think that's a really powerful process for all of us.
I have to say, in watching these transformations, these are just but a few. It's amazing to see how, we're talking so much about leader has to be vulnerable and leader has to be humble. And at the end, it's the leader who in many ways benefits the most because the leader has this wonderful flourishing life. They don't have that crippling pressure of having to be the smartest person in the room and have the burden of all the decisions. Now they're working together with a team. And it's true, everybody else flourishes around them. But let's not forget the leader also flourishes and has this amazing life. Yeah.
And I think sometimes action precedes belief. You used the word belief earlier, Meredith. How can people believe in this process? sometimes it's just, that's why we use the words open in our openness framework. Just be open to the idea. Take one of those small steps and see if that action doesn't reinforce some level of belief.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it prevents this from somebody dismissing it altogether, saying it's too hard, too much. I can't see myself doing X, whatever that might be. And yet, when you do take one step and see the benefits of doing it, reinforces doing more of that. I want to acknowledge the work that you are both doing with not just 100 Coaches Agency, your 100 Coaches community, and we share this drive to make a difference in the lives of others by helping raise the awareness level, raise the level of flourishing within leaders themselves. And I'm just curious if you have any other thoughts that have come to you that you would like to share with my listeners about any of the topics that we've covered today.
I think I would just encourage people to suspend doubt for just a moment if they can. You know, what's the harm in trying to engage in this process? Just be open a little bit and see if that doesn't create really massive ripple effects, both in your own life and in all the lives of the people around you.
You know, I would say, you know, we're talking about leadership, and in our case, we're talking about leadership at the highest levels that has, you know, we hope real impact on the world. And I think that the same things we're talking about for those leaders at the highest levels also is true for leaders at all levels. And interestingly, I think it's also true for each of us individually in our lives.
Yes.
I think that if we take this idea of the openness framework, especially with our one-on-one relationships, and look at those important relationships and say, I want to be open to change in this relationship. I want to be open to feedback and hear what this other person thinks about me and how I can improve. And when I hear that feedback, I want to be able to be open to taking action on that feedback so that I can make those changes to improve just this one-on-one relationship. And then maintain that, the hardest part, the dialogue of how am I doing? Am I holding to the changes that I said I would make? And when I'm not, that's okay. You'll let me know, and then I'll continue to try again the next day. And as important as we think it is that we do this on the macro level with the biggest companies and mid-sized companies, we also think it's important to do it on the micro level in every relationship we have. And by the way, human flourishing isn't just about the relationships you have with each other. It's also the relationships we have with the planet, right? Flourishing is our interrelationship with everything. And I think that's fundamentally the base of the message that we have.
That's so powerful. And my own thoughts in wrapping up, as I was just listening to what you were saying, is it has to start with me. You know, too often we look at, if they would just change this, if somebody else would just do that, we have our list of things we wish someone else would do about themselves. But your whole process is all about looking within.
Yes.
It's about, what is it about me that I may need to look at changing, or I may need feedback about, or I may need to take action on, or this being held accountable for. And I think that to me is a huge takeaway from our conversation. And I would like to encourage each one of my listeners to think about which of those 4 areas is a good place for you to start. And as Jacquelyn said, look at one step, one thing that you might consider doing differently that could make such a difference in your life, lead to changes with others.
I'm smiling because I know a lot of people buy the book to give to somebody else, right? Like we've heard this so many times, like I know lots of people who could use this book. And I think with all humility, I would say, if you're ever thinking about buying the book for somebody else, make sure you also buy a copy for yourself. Because I think the journey of becoming coachable is an ongoing journey. Nobody's hit perfection that I've seen yet, certainly. And you know, have a copy too. And just remember that you also need to continue the journey of becoming coachable.
Yeah.
Yes, I love that you shared that, Scott, because I think what you're really hitting at there is what I was just talking about, this idea that I want to give it to this person because they really need help with X. And yet, if we look within ourselves and say, all right, how am I being when I interact with this person about X? And look at what is our role. So we see what way are we responsible in this relationship for making it work. I think that's where the magic really can happen, because it's only when we are willing to look within and make changes within ourselves that we automatically are going to see things change with those other relationships. So thank you both for all of the insights you have shared today. I have loved this conversation, and I would love for you to share now with my listeners, how can they connect with you, get a copy of your book, and learn more about the important work you're doing?
Yeah, well, both of us love connection and relationships. So feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn. And we love connecting with people through LinkedIn. We try to respond to everybody. You can find out about the book at becomingcoachable.com. And our plan is to continue to have a dialogue with the reader over time. So more things will be sort of opened up on the becomingcoachable.com website. Of course, find the book in Amazon or wherever you find books. And then if you want to find out more about the 100 Coaches Agency, you can just go to 100coachesagency.com and find out all about us and the work that we do there.
It's great. Anything else you want to add, Jacquelyn?
No, we just look forward to being in relationship with everyone. We hope that that's one of the things that people take away, that life is better when we have rich relationships. And so we hope this is just the beginning of the conversation, and there will be many more to come.
Oh, that's a great way to end. And I feel that way about both of you. I'm so grateful to have met you and found other people that share this spirit of realizing how relationships are everything. So thank you both again for everything you're doing. And it was great to have you with me today.
Thank you, Meredith.
Yeah, such a great conversation, Meredith. Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning into my podcast. Now head over to growstrongleaders.com and check out our 2 books, Connect with Your Team and Peer Coaching Made Simple. While you're there, download the free facilitator guide to find out how to implement our unique peer coaching system. Until next time, I'm Meredith Bell.